Okay, and I'll share my screen. Okay, so this session is called Child in Context. And here we have the, oops, sorry, I'll just pin my video as well so that you'll be able to see. Okay, so hopefully you can view me as well. So just to recap, this session is called Child in Context. And the aims of this session, firstly, we're going to really think about this, develop an understanding of the ecology of childhood. And that's a bit of an unusual term. You might not have come across that before, but we're going to talk about it more and more and more, the ecology of childhood. Thinking about what's the setting, what's the environment of childhood. We're also going to understand the theory or the theoretical underpinning of Bronfenbrenner's model of human development. So Bronfenbrenner is somebody who wrote quite a lot in the 1970s, and he produced lots and lots of theories looking at how children and adults develop from a kind of psychological and developmental sort of perspective. So we're going to look at some of his theories today, because they really help us to understand the context of the child there. And then we're also going to be reflecting on how this connects to children in different settings and also in practice. So that's the plan for today. So hopefully we can move on to the next slide. It's being quite slow. There we go. Okay, so childhood studies as an academic field. Now, we talked a bit about this in the tutorial earlier today, about how early childhood as an academic subject is quite an extensive and quite a varied sort of field. But actually, it's only emerged perhaps towards the end of the 20th century, because until then, there was very much this notion that in young children, they just kind of go through that stage, and then when they start to read and write, or when they start to interact or perhaps speak, then actually that's when we can start to teach children things, that's when we can start to interact with children more and so on. But towards the end of the 20th century, became a lot more aware that actually from even the hours old, children can interact, and children do. And actually that there is a difference in a child if we do certain things, if we support them in their learning and development and so on. And so we became much more aware of children in early childhood and all the sort of research and findings that surround that. And there was a lot more focus on the social context of childhood rather than just the biology of childhood. So we can see by that what we mean is the biology, the biological unfolding. We see how a baby develops to an adult, well, to a child and then to an adult. We can see that happening. That's the sort of biology of it all. But actually, we've increasingly in the last sort of 10, 20 years or so, had this focus on actually what is the social context, what's going on, how is the child interacting with the people around them, how are they connecting with them, how are they learning from them, but how are they also teaching and modelling things to those who are around them. So it's really been developing as an academic field. Now this next slide again is interactive, so hopefully you can see on your screen. So it's over to you to add to this word cloud. As I said earlier, it's completely anonymous, so it won't show up who's written what. Any of these slides that's true for. So who or what influences children? So if you type in to your device that you're on now, perhaps do you think school influences children most, or friends, or parents, or who or what do you think influences children the most? So I'll just give you a minute to type in. I think you can type quite a few answers to this, so you can type them in and then submit, and then you can type more if you think of anything else. And the way this works is that the bigger the word, the more people have said that thing. So if you repeat something that someone else has said, it will put that in bigger writing. But if only one person has said it, it will be smaller writing. So we can see lots of different things being added to our word cloud. So keep typing them, keep adding them in, anything that you think of, that's great. So we've got friends and parents is quite a big impact, but also other things that are significant. We've got family, siblings, law, extended family, social media, I think very much that's a growing thing. Extended family, upbringing, community. Oh, it keeps changing, that's great, keep adding. Nature, Celebs, technology, I think, especially in recent times with COVID and everything, technology has been much more influential for our young children. Teachers, peers, other things there, the world around them. Great. Some really good contributions here. Thank you. So there's still time. You can still type them in and so on. This is really great to get your input, because what we're wanting to do is to start to think about all of these different things that you are putting on this word cloud here. They do influence children, and they have a massive influence and impact, and we want to be exploring that to see how much do they influence children, but also how can we help those influences to be more positive? How can we help those influences to shape and to support children and their well-being? So we're really thinking of the two things, their learning and development, but also their well-being, because we care about how they feel and how they are, as well as caring about how they're learning and developing. So all these things. So really, really interesting there. Really interesting, all of the things that you've added there. These will show up on the recording, so you can always, if you're busy scribbling things down, you can go back and watch the recording later. So we're going to go on to the next slide now, and I'll just click it now. Here we go. And I wanted to know, what do you think of this statement? Oops, I think it's gone into the wrong order. No, something's gone wrong there. We'll miss that bit out. Here we are. This is the thing. It's gone into the wrong order somehow. So thinking of childhood as a social construction. So this is what somebody, when we put these things on the screen here, as you can see, there's bullet points, and in brackets it says James and Prout 2015 E7. And what that's saying is that this idea, this is a quote from that person. So I'll read it out now. The immaturity of children is a biological fact, but the ways in which that immaturity is understood and made meaningful is a fact of culture. And so that's been written in a book, and we've lifted that out. We thought that was interesting to talk about. So we put it in these brackets here to show you where that's from. So if you or anybody else wanted to go off and find out more about that idea, you could look up that author, James and Prout. Two people obviously have worked together on that. The book or the journal was written in 2015, and this particular information is from page 7. And so if you go to the reference list, which will be at the end of this lecture, I'll show you that at the very end, James and Prout should be in there, and you can then see the full information all about this author if you wanted to go and look it up. So we're going to talk to you more about how you reference and how you put this information in, because in time you'll learn to do this in your essays too. So this is a quote from them. The immaturity of children is a biological fact. The ways in which that immaturity is understood and made meaningful is a fact of culture. And so here he's saying that the biology of children and the development of children, from baby to toddler to childhood to older childhood to adulthood, that's biology, that's a biological fact. But actually the way that we understand that is much more meaningful when we kind of understand culture, when we understand the surroundings of the child. And so I've put there that there's no single universal childhood that everybody experiences. Do you agree? And what I mean by that is that everybody has a completely different childhood. And that's the thing that I wanted to know if you agree or disagree. There's no single universal childhood. So how much do you agree with this? So I think if I click that, it should. Oh, I think it's somehow slightly become detached. Let me go back to this slide, and you should be able to vote then whether you agree or disagree. So you should be able to vote on your phones on the slider how much you agree or disagree with that statement that there's no universal childhood because everybody develops at a slightly different stage. Okay, so you can show us how much you agree or disagree with that. An interesting one there. And I think it's really interesting because if we all sat in the same room and talked about our own upbringing and our own childhood, then we would be very aware that I've had a very different childhood and upbringing to many of the others of you in the room. And even for those of you perhaps who grew up in the same road as each other, and you're the same age, still you will probably have a different experience, because family's been different, or school's been different, or you've had slightly different friends and that kind of thing. So it's really interesting. So we'll move on now to think about this. What different things do impact how a child is, how their childhood is, and how it's different. So the first two bullet points I've already talked about. And then the third bullet point here, there's expectations and understandings of what it means to be a child vary across time and place. So what do I mean by this? Well, if you think about now, if you went out and took a poll in round Liverpool University, Liverpool Hope University campus today, what do people expect childhood is like right now? What do people understand it to be? Now, would that be different than if I went to somewhere in Africa and did the same poll? If I went out and said to them, what do you think childhood would be like now? That's a different place, and so childhood is viewed differently. But also we could think about different times. So perhaps, not that I'm labeling myself as old or anything, but perhaps when I was at university, if we'd done a poll to say, what does childhood look like? It might have given different results than now if you do it while you're at university. But then perhaps when my parents were at university, if they'd done a poll to say, what are the expectations on children now? What do we understand about childhood? That would have been different. And so in that way, that's different over different time. And so we can see that the understandings of childhood is socially constructed. That's what we mean by the title on this slide here. Childhood is socially constructed, a social construction, because at that time, in that place, we decide what childhood is, how we understand it, what our expectations are, and so on. So we can see in different times and in different places that childhood is differently constructed, understood differently. So here's some pictures that we could think about. I've already mentioned, perhaps you could go somewhere in Africa to compare with the context in Liverpool. But how about here we have some children who are in the Arctic. In fact, I was trying to find a picture, but I don't think I've put it on here, of children walking around with machetes, because they do in certain contexts, very young children. And we would be horrified at that thought. I've even put some pictures there of children with scissors. Even scissors, we would all have different ideas of when it's the right time for a child to have scissors, for example. You can see that little guy with the red stripy t-shirt. He looks a little bit dangerous with those massive scissors. And what about this person at the bottom who's trying to cut their hair? That looks not the best. And then we see the picture on the top. The adult is very much helping the child or guiding them with their scissors, whereas the little girl there with the yellow scissors, that is, she's doing that independently. And so in each of those settings, people have decided, is it appropriate for this child to have scissors in this context? And for every single aspect of childhood, people will be deciding that. Is it appropriate to leave children at home on their own? At what age? Is it appropriate for a child to walk to school on their own? At what age? Is it appropriate for a child to go on the internet unsupervised? At what age? And all those sorts of things. So we're really thinking about this. How does this construction of child, how does this understanding of childhood change in different places or at different times? On the next slide, we'll see here this, where children sleep around the world. And this is a really, really interesting clip. It's just got music in the background, but so no words at all, but the pictures are really, really powerful. And I don't think we'll be able to watch it as part of this session right now, but later, perhaps you could go and watch it in your own time. But it's really, really fascinating to see. He's basically traveled around the world taking photos of different children's beds, basically, in different contexts. And it's fascinating to see super wealthy people in America, the child's bed and bedroom and all the lavishness of that, compared with a homeless child in Bolivia, I think it is, and where they sleep. And it's really quite a moving video, but unfortunately I don't think it will work right now. But you could watch it later. I'll post it onto Moodle for you to watch as well. So that's really interesting to think about that, because actually where a child sleeps has such an impact upon everything else to do with their life, because it will impact their well-being in so many ways. Do they feel safe? Do they feel happy? Are they healthy? Or is that place that they're sleeping riddled with disease? Is it so damp and cold that they can't possibly be healthy? Or is it safe and warm and dry and free from disease and so on? So even just something as basic as that, where a child sleeps, is so vastly different for different children around the world. And that's a really interesting thing to consider there. And the next slide, again, is thinking about childhood varying across different contexts and different cultures. And here's the picture I was talking about the child with the machete. So in some contexts, it would be accepted for a child needs a machete to protect themselves against wild animals, or perhaps they go out hunting for food for their family at a very early age. And so, that's fascinating to see. This image here of this girl holding this, I'm a girl child, do not make me a child mother. And of course, we probably have all seen headlines and things on social media all about children who are forced into marriage, children who become mothers at very young ages in some cultures and in some contexts. And that would be very different, probably in the UK context. But again, even within the UK, there are some families where that's not unusual. We can see their pictures there are very kind of in the centre at the bottom, very pristine looking sort of context, and lots of smiles and so on. We see the picture of the boy playing football around a shopping trolley. That's looking like a sort of wasteland sort of area, which is really interesting to see. That's where he is playing, which would be a very different context to perhaps in one of our sparkling, well-resourced nurseries, for example. And then the child at the bottom there of the screen, on the bottom right. And we see that he is cooking some kind of dinner. And actually, as we know, in different contexts around the world, children are working, are doing many, many household jobs, many often actually going out to work. So childhood really varies in different contexts and in different cultures around the world. So I'll move on to the next slide now. And so this is an interesting thing for you to consider. At what age can we do these different things? And so I was thinking about the age of consent, into consent for sexual activity. At what age is that different in different contexts around the world? And actually, even around the UK, there's some differences, but around the world, what is the official legal ages of consent? How does that vary? Thinking of criminal responsibility, a child can be deemed capable of committing a crime at what age? What age do we say this child is responsible for the crime that they've committed? And below that age that we would say they weren't of kind of an emotional or mental or intellectual development stage that they could be held responsible for what they've done. So in England, in Wales and in Northern Ireland, this age is 10. And it's only once a child reaches 10 years old that we would see that the child is responsible for what they're doing. However, in Scotland, it's actually 8 years old, although actually in 2018, sorry, that was raised to 12 years old, so even higher age than in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. But thinking about marriage, that's different. In the UK, it's 16, but in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, an individual must get consent if they're under 18, but in Scotland, they don't need that consent. There's a minimum legal age for marriage to protect children from abuse and harm and exploitation, but a child marriage still is a problem. And even in the UK, there could be impacts on a child's human rights. So the issue of what age a child can be married is really, really interesting. There's so many issues surrounding that in terms of forced marriage, violence, abuse, thinking about pregnancy for people who are only still children. And also that all of that would probably impact upon how much they could access education, whether they were able to still go to school if they were in a forced marriage, if they became pregnant, and so on. But then also this thing of what age somebody can vote. And across the UK, really, that's 18. It's slightly lower in some of the elections in Scotland and Wales, but generally it's 18. But across the world, we would see differences in what age these different things can occur. So it's really, really interesting to think about this, how things are different in different contexts. We're going to look now at some of the theories and the backgrounds to some of these ideas. So you may find it helpful if you are wanting to take notes of the lectures, particularly some of these theories and backgrounds. It might be worth jotting down some of the key things. So I'll give you a little bit of an indication as I talk now of some of the things that might be helpful for you to jot down as part of your notes. But firstly, I wanted to ask you if you could answer this question in our poll using your phones. Hopefully, if you've still got them there. What impacts a child the most? So I've put some things across the bottom there, some suggestions: their diet, their nutrition, the environment, the family, the nursery or school, the government, or their neighbourhood. So you can vote now. Use the code again. Hopefully it still should be just running as it was for you. And so far, most people are thinking it's mainly the environment or the family, but I've got a few votes for nursery and school there coming up. Anybody going to say any of the other things? Or are they going to be our main areas? That's really interesting to see. And again, it will be interesting to do this activity in different cultures around. Would it be universal that the family perhaps is thought by most to be most influential? Is interesting because I'm sure if you ask the government themselves how much impact they have on children, they might think that they are perhaps the most important one here, whereas we as practitioners perhaps see things a bit differently. So that's really, really interesting to see. So thank you for voting there. So here we see, so you can write this down, Yuri Bronfenbrenner, and he's a man who, you don't need to write the information about him, just his name, and 1979. That's when he produced this theory, which we're going to talk about. And we're going to talk about his theory quite a lot because it's really very, very helpful at helping us to understand early childhood and children and how they're impacted. So he was a Russian-American developmental psychologist. Sorry, I should have said as well as me putting the recording of this session online later, also there is a set of these PowerPoint slides that you can also access on Moodle as well, so just without any kind of recording. So he was a Russian-American developmental psychologist, and he made links between a child's development and their ecology. So I mentioned the word ecology at the beginning. This is the idea of the child's kind of upbringing and the child's context and the setting that the child is in. And this is what he called it, the ecology of human development. 1979 was when the book was published. So this is Bronfenbrenner, and it's probably a name that you'll get used to. So I'm going to look on the next slide, and it tells us a little bit more about his theory. And here it is. So you don't need to draw this really. Like I say, you can get it off the PowerPoint slide later if you want to. But the basic thing is that in the center of the circle is the individual child. And we can see there the child sitting as quite a young, well, probably a toddler sort of age there, but it could be a child of any age there. And then he basically spoke about circles, concentric circles going out from there. So in the very center, we have the individual child. But then around that, we have a circle involving the child. The circle that encloses the child there. And he called this the microsystem. Everything that happens immediately around the child, he called it the microsystem. And so this includes the immediate family and the neighbourhood, perhaps play area, perhaps the child's neighbours, if they speak to them. Maybe they don't really interact very much with their neighbourhood, but also the childcare setting that they go to, or their school, their nursery, their childminder, the nanny, whatever it is. And so Yuri Bronfenbrenner said that actually the people in this most central circle, in the microsystem, they are the most influential on a child. And so it's really interesting that you voted, a lot of you voted and said some of those things, the family, the school, and I can't remember what else some of you were saying there. But in that microsystem, and you could perhaps write down that word, microsystem, that is the most influential part of the child. Somebody's just asked, what was the code to get into Mentimeter? So I will, if anybody has it to hand, they perhaps type it in the chat to everyone. But if you don't have it, I'll get it on the next slide before we need to vote for anything. Has anybody got it? No. Okay, I will get it for you in a moment. So let me just finish explaining about this theory, Bronfenbrenner, and then I'll get the code so that you can carry on being involved in the next bit. So we've got the microsystem, which is most influential on the child. And then there's a circle which is slightly bigger, slightly wider. And this he called the exosystem. And this is the extended family. Oh, there we are. Somebody's put the code in for you. So hopefully you can access that on the website is menti.com, www.menti.com. And the code is 1139059. Thank you for the code. That's great. So we've got the microsystem and then the exosystem. And the exosystem, so this involves extended family, friends, neighbours, even the parent's workplace, because things that are happening in the workplace will impact upon the child. For example, if the parent's really stressed, really overwhelmed, or if they become made redundant or something like that, but also community health services. So all of these things do influence the child, but not quite as much as the things that were in the smaller circle. And then we see the bigger circle again is the macro system. And this circle includes things that again do influence the child, but not quite as much as the things that were in the central circle. So this is things like the laws. We talked about the government earlier in the poll. Customs. What are the traditions of the country that the child is being raised in? And what are the values? Things even like sharing or caring, or this kind of community spirit. Those sorts of values, they do influence the child, but not quite as much as the things that are in the microsystem, in the more central section. So this is a theory. We're going to talk about it loads and loads over the next couple of weeks. So don't worry too much. You could go and look it up as well if you want to find out more about it. We're going to just look on the next slide here. So here, this summarizes. Again, you could jot some of this down if that's helpful for you. But again, you could look this up on the other PowerPoint on Moodle later. And so this is a summary of it. So the microsystem, the innermost ring that I talked about, these are the people that the child interacts with face to face, which is an interesting concept in these COVID times. And actually, perhaps COVID and all of the restrictions that we're under probably make this whole theory even more so true. Because the immediate family has become so influential, particularly for young children, because they haven't seen many other people face to face really. And so that's the microsystem, the parents, the immediate family, and so on. Then the mesosystem, the settings and the links between the child, sorry, that's not written right, but the links that the child has. So nursery, community centre, church, those kind of things. And then the exosystem, where the child does not interact directly, but they influence the child. So for example, the parent's workplace. Like I said, if the parent is super stressed, when they come home, it will have an impact on the child. The macro system, the larger socio-cultural context. What that means is looking at the social environment and also the cultural sort of environment. So what are the cultures? Like I said, sharing, solidarity, community spirit, all those sorts of fundamental British values which have been talked about a lot recently. So that's just a summary of the diagram, really. Okay, later, after 1979, when he first produced this idea, he also added another circle, another layer to it, and he called this the chronosystem, and he used this to describe changes over time. So for a child, the impact of divorce actually doesn't just happen in one moment. It doesn't just happen at the time of divorce, but actually that impacts in a longer term way. Similarly, the impact of war or conflict. In fact, the impact of COVID has been much documented and written about. And that is something which very much is part of the chronosystem, because it won't just impact children right now, but it will impact them going forward quite a bit. So that was kind of a later addition that Von von Brenner added. So then if we think about this, okay, so this is a theory, it's an idea. I've already been saying to some of you already, just because something is written in a book, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily right. And many academics have scrutinized this theory and thought, well, does it apply in this way? Does it apply in this way? Is it really true? How helpful is it? And so on. And so it's right for us to do that. But it is a theory that we do find very helpful to help us to think about what is the context of the child and how can we then pay attention to that in the work that we're doing with young children. And so this theory, I've written here, it's had impact in so very many ways, but we can see that the Head Start program in the United States, this is a program, what we like to do on the course is to think about what different settings and contexts are good examples of good practice, really. And the Head Start program is a really good example in America. It's a very comprehensive early childhood program, and it includes education, but also healthcare, also nutrition, and it has a big emphasis on parent involvement, and it's particularly thinking about how they can support low-income children from low-income families. And it's designed to foster very stable family relationships, but also to enhance the well-being, so to make sure that a child feels a sense of well-being, and also to help people to provide an environment that supports the development of good cognitive skills, good thinking skills, good academic skills, to the intellectual skills, you might want to say, for a child. So that's the Head Start program. It's a really good example. You could look that up later just on their website. You could Google that and find out a bit more about it if you're interested. Also, High Scope is really interesting, and that builds on children's strengths and interests and their abilities, rather than perhaps saying, oh, all children have to do this in a very certain regimented, structured kind of way. High Scope very much thinks about what is the child's strengths, what are their interests, and what are their abilities. And their central belief is that the child constructs their own learning by doing things and by being actively involved with the people around them and also the resources around them and their ideas. So basically, whereas before we said there is no universal experience of childhood, no child has the same experience of childhood. So this High Scope program very much works with this and says, okay, each child has a different learning experience and each child constructs their own learning. They develop their own learning. So, for example, if a child is interested in a certain thing, like, let's say, role play in the kitchen area, they will go and do that every opportunity that they have. If there's a child, I remember my little boy, every single day he used to come home from preschool telling me he'd been playing in the construction corner, and it was usually kind of Lego or stick or bricks or that kind of thing, and he just wanted to build and create and do stuff. So whatever chance he had, because that was his interest, he was off doing that. And so in that way he was constructing his own learning experience. And he was being allowed to do that because there were so many options. Another child might have been sitting there writing or reading, or perhaps running around getting lots of physical exercise. So children are constructing their own learning experience. And then another example, Sure Start Centres in the UK. I'm sure you know a lot about these centres, but again, the idea is wanting to support families and make sure that children have a really good start to life. And this sense of awareness that actually not all children, when you think of their microsystem, not all children have a healthy and wholesome microsystem. So Sure Start Centres have been partly trying to support people in a child's microsystem, to support them in making that stronger and more effective and more wholesome. So that's just some examples of how this kind of understanding of thinking about the child's context, their ecological system, how that helps us to shape and to form the work that we're doing with children. So that's the first bullet point. And the second bullet point, in theory, development is seen as lifelong rather than exclusively of childhood. And this is so true because, you know, even me at my really old age stage, I can tell you I'm still learning and learning and learning, especially at the moment. I'm learning all sorts of new technologies and all sorts of things there, but also I'm learning new things about myself, learning new things about how I connect with other people, perhaps learning how I enjoy relaxing, how I enjoy supporting my mental health and keeping that in a good place. Perhaps I'm also definitely constantly learning academically because I'm just reading and reading and reading as much as I can to learn more and more and more. So very much Bronfenbrenner and his theory was that learning doesn't stop or development doesn't stop just because somebody finishes childhood and moves to adulthood, but learning and development is very much a lifelong process. And also the final bullet point there's greater integration of approaches in the social sciences. So this is basically saying we need to be aware of the social sciences. So looking at things like relationships with family, things like thinking all the other kind of social aspects there, thinking how can we connect those in to our study of children, thinking about the kind of things we were talking about in the tutorial today about different professionals and different careers, and how actually all of those different professionals are very interested in a child's ecology, in a child's context, in a child's setting. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. And so I want you to kind of just spend a second, you don't need to write this down, it's just something to ponder really. Reflect on your own life journey so far. So what things have formed and shaped you so far? Because obviously we're all constantly changing. So perhaps you can think about even, you know, yourself now sitting wherever you are, how different are you to what you were this time last year? Last year when you were starting your sixth or year, whatever it's called, 13 is it, I think, you know, how much different are you now? Many of you have got a hugely more independence in some different sorts of forms and ways and so on. Many of you have learned and developed so much academically and intellectually, but even other ways too, even just the way you understand and relate to different people around you, that will be different. But think about who has influenced those things, who in your microsystem, but then also who slightly more widely has influenced you in your journey so far. So it's really interesting to think about these things even for ourselves. So move on to the next slide. There we go. And there's another clip here that you can watch later at your leisure if you want. And it's basically talking, trying to sort of show a pathway through of how things are kind of determined by our family, a bit like a set of dominoes like this, and how everything kind of happens, and we sort of have no control over it in a way. And so it was interesting to watch that and to then ponder Do you agree with that? Are we determined by our family and our community background and our experiences? And we're gonna consider that more in future sessions, really. The extent to which a child's future life is impacted by their early childhood, but very much those of us who are looking more and more and more into early childhood are seeing how influential these early years are. Of course, people still have choices. People can still choose to do things differently, but very much the experiences that children have in these early years very much forms and shapes them in their ongoing journey and in their ongoing life experiences and so on. So just going to pause there and see if anybody had any questions. So you can, I think you should be able to type them into your phone. Again, it's all anonymous, and they would just appear on my little screen down here. And I haven't got any yet, but feel free to type in any questions about that, even if you just want to know where the information will be or something like that. But what we're going to do is we're going to finish shortly, and I'll pop this recording onto Moodle so you can watch it again if you want to. And there'll be a slight delay. I think it probably won't be on until tomorrow morning because I'm going to run it through YouTube so that we can get subtitles added on, because that's helpful for some people, well, for everybody really, I think. So so it should be on in the morning, but as I say, in the meantime, you can at the moment get onto the PowerPoint just, but it hasn't got my video attached to it. So that's there. So I think, yeah, that's the final slide. So I'll stop sharing there, and we'll finish the lecture there. But well done, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'll just stop